Subcommittee number 2 met on Wednesday. First on is House Bill 1697, Delegate Marshall's bill. There are amendments to the bill. I move those amendments.
Okay. Jeff, report the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, the same amendment is made on 3 different lines, beginning on line 17. After the stricken 2017, strike 2022 and insert 2020. And the same amendment on line 25, strike 2022, insert 2020. And the same amendment a third time on line 33, strike 2022 and insert 2020.
Now, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the amendments in block. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now, the amended bill before you, and I have a
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 1697 extends the sunset date for several measures related to land use, and I recommend reporting, or the committee recommend reporting with amendments. And I
seconds. Okay, everybody ready to vote? Everybody knows what we're doing. Any comments? All in favor of reporting House Bill 1697 will vote yes. All opposed, vote no. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 15, no 0, the bill is reported.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 1723 is Delegate Anderson's bill, and if I can wait to take that up at the end with Delegate LaRock's bill, which is very similar. Delegate LaRock's bill is 2093, and we'll deal with those two at the same time as we finish. Next bill is House Bill 2319. This is from Delegate Miyares. There are amendments with this. 2319, Delegate Miyares' bill.
Jeff, I'll wait for you to get the amendment.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have a series of amendments. We're going to have 2 title amendments, and then the substance of the amendments are we're going to strike subsection A, beginning line 15. Strike subsection A and the letter B in its entirety. Then on line 24, we're going to strike section 15.2, 111 in its entirety. So all that will remain in the bill is what was subsection B.
Approve the amendments.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the amendments in block. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Now, comments? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, actually, in its present format, this is greatly pared down, and it simply requires reporting on who is participating in community rating systems and recommendations on legislation that might enhance participation in the community rating system from FEMA. It came out of the committee with amendments 9-0, and I so move.
Been moved and seconded that we report House Bill 2319.
Mr. Chairman.
Comments and
Mr. Chairman.
questions? Yes. Who?
Is there any fiscal impact to this bill?
Sir?
Is there any fiscal impact to this bill?
Mr. Chairman, there is no fiscal impact statement received for this bill.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You wish to comment?
Nothing to add, just
Oh, okay.
give a question.
Okay. Well, it's been recommended unanimous to report, and I have a second to report. Any further discussion? All in favor of reporting House Bill 2319 will vote yes. All opposed will vote no. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 16, no 0, the bill is reported.
Mr. Chairman, the next bill is the Chairman's bill, House Bill 2442. It provides that ordinance collection of overdue accounts may also provide for the imposition of collection of administrative fees. The subcommittee recommended reporting 9-0, and I so move.
It's been moved and seconded. We report House Bill 2442. And is there any discussion? Comments? All in favor vote yes. All opposed vote no.
2, insert 3. On the next line, 174, strike the word 1 and insert 2.
Mr. Chairman, these amendments are a compromise between various parties involved here. Again, this bill sets certain limits for the bodies within the city of Chesapeake. Move the amendments. Second.
The moved and second, we adopt the amendments in block. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This amended bill is before you. What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, the subcommittee recommended report with amendments 9-0 and I so move.
The moved and seconded, we report House Bill 2449, Delegate Knight's bill. All in favor, vote. Any discussion? All in favor, vote yes. All opposed, vote no. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 16, no 0, the bill is reported.
Mr. Chairman, next bill is House Bill 2469 from Delegate Jones. It gives authority to treasurers of localities to waive certain fees. This is clarification of what we believe current law is. The bill reported from subcommittee 8-0, and I so move.
Been moved and seconded that we report House Bill 2469, Delegate Jones' bill. Any discussion? Anybody wish to comment? Everybody ready to vote? All in favor, vote yes. All opposed, vote no. Clerk, close the roll. Ayes 16, no 0, the bill is reported.
Mr. Chairman, if we could return to Delegate LaRocque's bill, House Bill 2093. House Bill 2093 directs the Commission of Local Governments to provide a estimated fiscal impact on localities for relocated refugees. In hearing this bill, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate Anderson's bill, House Bill 1723, I at least was very confused as where we stand on refugee reporting, how that information would actually come forward, who that information would go to. Certainly on initially the House Bill 2093, Commission on Local Government felt that they could not meet a 45-day time frame as currently is in the bill. On Delegate LaRocque's bill, after extensive discussion, the committee recommended reporting 7-3. Mr. Chairman, the patron is here and I'd ask that maybe he speak to the bill.
Delegate LaRocque, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There were a number of questions and good discussion on the bill, and I brought with me, I think, some supplemental information that I hope will be useful. Cost was a fair amount of discussion on the cost of refugees, which are now primarily coming from the Middle East. And I know I'd seen this information in the past, and I have it in front of me, but it's quite shocking when you go back and realize that the cost of resettlement includes heavy welfare use by these refugees. 91% receive food stamps, 68% receive cash assistance. And the average cost over 5 years per household of 4 is just over $250,000, $257,481. This is from the Center for Immigration Reform. The level of education is such that it puts a very significant burden on local education. The schools that are required to accommodate using a number of non-cash programs such as food stamps, public housing, and Medicaid. So these are obviously about state costs as well. So again, the general purpose of this is just to provide information that would facilitate good decision making, basically on a mandate that the federal government controls. We have a hand in through the Department of Social Services, and we want them to be able to benefit from this study. There were concerns that this would place an undue burden on the Commission on Local Governments, and quite honestly, I disagree respectfully. I think if they program a spreadsheet allowing for regional variations in the cost of the services, it will be a matter of plugging in a number and anticipating a number. One of the open questions was, what is the period of time between a stakeholder meeting, the announcement of refugees, and the arrival of refugees? And sometimes it's as little as 5 days. So there may be a general discussion of whether a community can accept refugees, which may or may not include all the stakeholders if they don't happen to be available for a meeting. But that's really next to no time to make an informed decision. So perhaps by having this reported information, one can anticipate and bring it to a stakeholder meeting the next time there is one that could impact an area. So just to make that clear, a 45-day turnaround, which is what we're asking for, would put the information in their hands so that they can generally review that and come into the next stakeholder meeting better informed. As far as I can remember, those were the primary questions that came forward, and be glad to answer any questions the committee has.
Questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Excuse me. Yes, sir.
I would like to speak on the bill when, I don't have a question, but I'd like to speak on the bill when I have a chance.
Del LaRock, we heard testimony in the subcommittee that the Commission on Local Government meets only 60 days and that they have to approve anything that staff does before they're released. So if we put a 45-day time frame on there and they're not allowed to release the information for 60 days, are we not setting them up for failure?
Well, I would say to the chairman that that appears to me to be a bureaucratic hurdle that's placed in front of this that is completely contrived. If they can program a spreadsheet, the commission can meet and approve the mechanics of that spreadsheet and allow them to plug in a number. Essentially, if a local government anticipates 20 refugees coming in, they would ask that commission just to basically react to that specific request on a pre-approved spreadsheet. That's if they have to micromanage the output of their full-time employees to that level, then I think that brings into question whether or not they're operating efficiently, and what they cover in their meetings is really needs to be dealt with at that level. So again, I think that a pre-approved spreadsheet would not be putting them at risk of bad information coming out.
Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with any aspect of that, but their current policy is. And so is your intent to direct or to change how they operate currently with this legislation? So is this going to change how the council, are you directing that the council and local government change how they function with this bill? Because their current policy is that the commission will approve this before it goes out.
Well, if that's an internal policy that is not compatible with this request, it would seem that their decision would have to be to put forward a policy that would accommodate this request. In other words, to say, well, our policies allow you to release information in response to this request in this manner, and if that's a policy change, the answer is yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Do we know why they've set a policy that they have to review information before it's released?
Not specifically. I think that one could speculate, but
And do we know if this would impact other areas on what the council of local governments are doing as far as approval of processes and release of information?
I'm not sure I understand specifically what you're asking. If there's a change in policy,
saying is that, I'm not sure whether Commission on Local Government requires a review of all information before it's released. Before I would make them change their policy, I would want to understand why that policy was in place.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I would say if it mattered to them that much, they perhaps would be here, and maybe they are, and they could better answer your question.
Chairman, I believe they are here.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. David Conmey with the Commission on Local Government, the local government policy administrator for the commission. That concern on the 45-day timeline is rather technical in nature. I understand your point. The workload that the commission typically responds to at this point involves interlocal agreements between local governments, settling boundary disputes, the voluntary settlement agreements of annexation, consolidations of local governments. Furthermore, some of our other primary responsibilities, again, are on this reporting cycle. We produce the annual cash proffer report for the Commonwealth. We produce an annual catalog of mandates on local governments and an assessment of those mandates. So this responsibility is something that is outside the scope of something that we would do within such a short time period. So that's really where it's just unprecedented for us for our current workload and current responsibilities.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I guess this is a question for either the patron or the Commission on Local Government. Sorry, make you sit down. Stand back up. Okay, so as I understand, your goal is to essentially have, you believe that in order for a local community, say they're going to get 10 refugees, not immigrants, refugees, and you'd like to know what that fiscal impact is. If I'm going to collect all that information, I'm going to call the local government and ask them what it costs them to put a child through school, et cetera, and you're going to have local variances in which you believe that there's going to be a spreadsheet available, correct? So rather than a 45-day turnaround, can we just have the Commission on Local Governments collect that information, build that spreadsheet, and then allow the localities to access that spreadsheet? It'd be almost instantaneous at that point.
I think the only difference, Delegate Weber, would be that the best information, I think, resides at the state level, and certainly some of it would come from the local government. But this would put the majority of the responsibility at the state level to maintain such a document, and that would be accessible to the local governments. So the state government assisting local governments, which is the general nature of the commission's purpose.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? I guess this would be for the gentleman on the Commission on Local Government.
Yes, sir.
Could you produce such a Excel spreadsheet so that the localities and then just be able to answer any specific questions if they have them?
It's certainly possible within our current role. We do provide some technical assistance. Those are just generally phone calls, answering questions. Again, most of those questions, though, are geared to interlocal agreements, voluntary settlement agreements, annexation, reversion to town status. We could attempt something like this, but I would have to, rely upon the opinion of my superiors before I could really comment on that more specifically. And I would also just add your point about reaching out to the localities regarding their budgets. That's actually the other point for why we oppose this bill. It's just that in a hypothetical scenario, if such a request was referred to the Commission on Local Government, it's likely that our very first question would be to then reach back out to that specific locality, ask them for their budget information, because they are the ones who have a greater familiarity and comfort level with those budgetary figures. So we're not sure that we would be able to produce anything of significant value to that locality as far as that potential fiscal impact would be.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? Would a spreadsheet like that be more easily produced by the Department of Social Services in regards to state costs?
I can't comment on that myself. I do know that there are staff from the Department of Social Services here. It's possible that they might be able to answer that question better than I can.
Delegate, Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question for the patron. It seems that the bill would have some sort of fiscal impact. Did you get a fiscal impact statement?
Did not.
You did not. And then, Mr. Chair, a question for the representative from the Council of Local Government.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I heard you testify about the work that would be involved. Is there any way for you to determine what would happen? For example, would you need an additional administrative staff to do this? No idea.
No idea. I just wouldn't feel comfortable commenting on that without looking at the matter more thoroughly.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Poindexter.
Yes, sir. A question for the gentleman from Housing Commission.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner of Local Government.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the Department of Social Services, State Department of Social Services website?
Somewhat, but not in a level of detail, not in a thorough level of detail.
Sure. I point out that database contains much in the way of country of origin, number of refugees, sex, that kind of thing. It's not identified, but that information is available to you. There's input for each locality as to how many are coming in and would indicate the type of resources. For example, language interpreters. And that would be a source of data that wouldn't have any fiscal impact for you.
Delegate Weaver, you have another question?
Yes, sir. I guess this is for the patron.
I just want to remind the committee, we must be out of here by 9 o'clock, so we can
Okay, I
apologize
apologize.
on whatever.
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
By fiscal impact, what exactly information are you wanting the localities to have?
Schools, education would be one. Health department, social services, emergency services would be, I would think, would cover the bulk of that, if not all.
Further question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Weaver.
I represent 3 or 4 localities that their school systems are actually very different. Fauquier has, $56 million from the state. They cover the rest. Rappahannock County gets $1.1 million from the state. They cover almost 80% of their cost per student. So wouldn't that be almost locality specific on what it would cost a student, as well as emergency services? Fauquier County has a number of voluntary fire departments, whereas Loudoun County is almost entirely professional paid. Wouldn't that vary per locality, and the locality would have to determine what those costs are?
Well, I certainly agree, Mr. Chairman, that these regional variations do exist and could be dealt with when programming a document to produce information. I think a document coming from a branch of the state government would also carry additional weight in discussions rather than and one that was developed locally when presented to the public. I think that it kind of removes the perception that there might be bias in when presenting information. Would also allow this information to be accumulated, although this bill doesn't ask the Commission on Local Governments to do that, but presuming they would just under normal record keeping routines would have information that, if requested by the state in the form of a report, would be very beneficial to understand statewide patterns and overall costs. So I think that would be a significant benefit that's secondary to the primary purpose.
Delegate Borsco, did you have anything to add?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman. I just have a question for the patron. Wondering, I worked in local government for many years in the social services area. I'm wondering if you've done any survey to find out exactly what counties and other localities are already doing to assess these expenses and the benefits of perhaps the tax that refugees might be paying into the system as well. Have you done any research already to understand what counties and cities are already doing?
I could speak using this information that I have in front of me if I can get to it quickly enough. I read this morning that by and large the refugees consume more than their taxes cover. But as far as whether or not local governments have already done this analysis, I think, is that the question? No, I have not.
I have some more here that need to speak. Delegate Marshall is next, and then.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I see a gentleman that has stepped forward. Looks like he's chomping at the bit to say something. So if you would come forward and tell us who you are and what you got to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Stephen Allen. I'm the director of the International Rescue Committee here in Richmond. We're a humanitarian nonprofit who is doing refugee resettlement here in Richmond, along with Church World Service and Commonwealth Catholic Charities, the three agencies here in Richmond. I think that House Bill 2093 is really looking at one side of the coin, and that's the cost that refugees bring to communities. The other side that I think is must be assessed as well, though, is the financial contribution. Each refugee that comes brings with them about $1,500 in federal money that is directly inputted into our economy. Second, we have an employment-based program for refugee resettlement here in the United States. So within 120 days, we must have families working and paying their own rent. So we have about nationally an 86% success rate of people working within 120 days. These are folks working in hotels, low-wage, entry-level work, but they are hard-working people. I would just say that any financial impact that's looked at should also be looked at the positive things that are brought to our community as well. Thank you.
Delegate Marshall.
Quick, sir. So let's talk a little bit about the cost when those families or individuals come. Does the state, local, or federal pay for them, and how much, and for how long?
That is from the State Department. The Department of State federal money is passed directly to the resettlement organizations. It's about $1,500 per individual, man, woman, and child.
And how long?
That's it. That's all we get. So we got to get people working really fast.
So you get $1,500 not per month, per...
No.
Okay. And so how many people were, and so you said Richmond, so how many people were introduced into the Richmond area last year and from all over the world?
Yes, there's about 450 people, but as a gentleman referred, the largest population here is actually not refugees. They are special immigrant visa holders, SIV. So these are folks who work with U.S. troops and U.S. government in Afghanistan primarily. So they, many of them are combat heroes, translators, people who have worked side by side with our armed forces. Yes, sir.
Yes, Delegate.
Mr. Chairman, speaking to Bill, and also, I am the son of immigrants, grandson of immigrants, and son of an immigrant. My mother came over with nothing, and no education, no money, just a dream. And this is a nation made up of dreamers, of immigrants. This is what's the strength of our economy and the fabric of our nation. It's made up of our immigration over the years. We are a vital part of the richness of American society, where immigrants are everywhere in the nation's higher education institutions. We contribute as professors, students, researchers, scholars. We run some of the best high-tech businesses. I think that, and I've been to refugee camps in Africa. I've seen the immigrants and the refugees. I think we should be continue our opening ways and not be putting any kind of mean-spirited bills like this. I think this is you're not doing us a service here, because you're not looking at the positive side of what we bring to this country. And my family's been was under the yoke of the communists and of the Soviet Union, And I know how important it is that we open our doors to these refugees from these kinds of places. So I'm speaking against it, and I'm sorry to see this kind of bill come forward.
Mr. Chairman,
Elliot Solid.
Mr. Chairman, the subcommittee recommended reporting 7-3, and I so move.
Been moved and seconded, we report House Bill 2093, House Bill. Any further discussion? Everybody ready to vote? All in favor vote yes, all opposed vote no. And the clerk will close the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ayes 3, noes 14, the bill fails. Next is Delegate Anderson. This is the last bill, I think.
No pressure, right, Mr. Gibson?
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Anderson, we had a good discussion at the committee. Delegate Anderson was called away to another event. The committee moved this to the full committee without recommendation. It was not because of any adverse thing to the bill. We just simply ran out of time.
And we're about to run out of time now, so what do you have, Jeff? Do you have a substitute? We have a substitute for House Bill 1723. I'll entertain a motion on the substitute. I move in a second, we adopt the amendment nation substitute for House Bill 1723. Delegate Anderson, Bill, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Delegate Anderson, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Substitute.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me explain to you what I was attempting to do with this bill and then make a suggestion to the committee if I might. With this bill came entirely from me. It was not prompted by anybody to do this. It came as a result of an experience that I had probably a year ago in Prince William County when a youth organization that specializes, and it sits in my district, specializes in the intake of, I don't know if this is the correct terminology or not, but when I was in the U.S. military, we referred to them as foreign nationals who had come to the United States and they operated a facility that took in young people and transitioned them into the country. I had received a large number of constituent inquiries about that and was unaware that this was taking place in Prince William County. So my standard response to my constituents, a very large number, was that we were receiving none of these unaccompanied children. About a week ago, news reports broke that there were. Needless to say, I felt embarrassed, shortchanged, and ill-equipped to answer legitimate questions from constituents. So as I contemplated over the following year, I decided to put this in to define a mechanism by which simply those of us who sit in elected seats can be informed about these sorts of things so that we can at least, from an informed and intelligent perspective, answer constituent queries. That is the sole single purpose. So, Mr. Chairman, I brought this bill. She made it through the subcommittee and on to you, and here's what I'd like to say to you. In the last 48 hours, what has become apparent to me is I've met with a number of stakeholder groups on both sides of this issue that I feel that this needs more work. And I am going to ask the committee if you would continue this to 2018. And we'll, of course, defer to whatever decision the committee makes. But I feel like I need to take in dialogue with broader cross-sections. Actually, I have received a huge number of favorable communiques from the general public and from my own district about this. But I just feel like it needs more work so I get it where I want to be. And it could be, Mr. Chairman, that I end up with a non-legislative solution. And if that's the case and I get to where I want to be, I'm happy, because if I keep a page or so out of those books on the shelf behind you, I think that that's a worthy endeavor. So as a result, Mr. Chairman, I would ask that you continue the bill to 2018.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, I agree, but we can't carry over to 2018. There's an election year, so I would move that we gently lay on the table.
Second. We gently lay this bill on the table, House Bill 1723. All in favor of laying on the
Mr. Chairman. 10 minutes early.
We're on time, and listen, with no further, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, and I want to thank all the members of this, committee for all your hard work.